It's a good-looking crew. It's a little hot in here. If those of you who are watching at home don't know, it's a little hot in here, and they've got their navy blue uniforms on over here. I bet they're even hotter than we are, standing up there under the spotlight, but they've done much tougher jobs, I think, before. So we're thrilled to have you guys here. And I just wanted to say to all the law enforcement who are in this building, to all the law enforcement who are watching at home, we love you, we're grateful to you, and we're always going to stand behind you. Thank you. You guys. Now, I have a few other thank yous before we get to the meat of what I wanted to say here. First of all, we're in this incredible hangar, and it belongs to Dennis and Kay Yates. Where are Dennis and Kay at? Where are you guys? Thank you all so much. Thank you guys for having us. And of course, we're also thrilled to be joined by the hangar's previous owner, Jack Roush. So Jack, thank you so much for building this thing and for having us. It's good to be here. Now, I'm joined by one of my favorite former Senate colleagues, and that is the great Senator Ted Budd from North Carolina. Ted, thank you so much. A very good guy. And I assume we have some other Republicans in here, so are we going to send Ted Budd a great fellow senator and Michael Whatley from the state of North Carolina? Now, Michael Whatley, I got to know, he was the RNC chair. He was a great friend of me and of the whole administration during the race, but Michael loves the state of North Carolina. He's going to fight for law enforcement. He's going to fight for law and order. He's going to fight for good jobs. He's going to fight for North Carolinians and nobody else. Michael Whatley, God bless you, man. Thank you so much for being here. We've got Congressman Addison McDowell. Addison, where are you? Stand up and be recognized. Thank you, Addison. All right, this is your first term, right? Are you happy what you signed up for? That's good. Okay. Let's be honest, he couldn't say no, even if he wanted to, but he loves serving the great people in North Carolina and Washington. He does a very, very good job. And then I also want to give a shout out to Mark Harris. Mark, where are you? Please, Mark, you're a great guy. Thank you for everything. But I want to just say that being here in North Carolina, we're here to talk about law and order. We're here to talk about law enforcement, and we're here to talk about the basic fact that you all pay your taxes. They go to safe streets and safe cities. You ought to be able to enjoy the places that were built by your tax dollars. You ought to be afraid, the criminals ought to be afraid of you. You ought not be afraid of the criminals. It's very simple. And I think for too long in this country, we actually took the exact wrong approach. We told people that if you were walking down a city street and there was a crazy person over there yelling and screaming at your kids, you ought to walk to the other side of the street rather than possibly be accosted by a violent person. Well, you know what I think? I think that if a person is being violent and threatening to young children and young families, they ought to send their asses to prison instead of telling people that they got to cross the other side of the street. Now, and Ted is going to be mad at me. Ted is a good Christian man. He does not cuss. So, Ted, forgive me if I get a little fired up sometimes when I'm talking about this. Look, I've gotten in arguments with people before. You know, a couple years ago, I took my family to New York City. This was when I was in the United States Senate. We spent a few days there. It was a wonderful trip in a lot of ways. But, you know, every time we went to the subway, I'd have one of my kids grabbing onto my leg or afraid because there was a crazy person yelling, hollering, and screaming at a 3-year-old little kid. Why do we live like this? Why do we accept this in our communities? And the answer is because of bad political leadership. We have accepted for too long this idea that we ought to give over our streets to criminals and to vagrants and to people who are screaming at us instead of taking back our streets with our incredible law enforcement. And there are so many things that we can do. You know, in Washington, D.C., the first 2 months that we surged the National Guard, that President Trump surged the National Guard into Washington, D.C., there were no murders. Not a single murder for 2 weeks in the streets of Washington, D.C. And you know, we have all these world leaders who come. And we'll tell them, you know, we haven't had a murder in Washington, D.C. in 2 weeks. And these world leaders will look at us and say, is that supposed to impress us? Like, that doesn't sound very good. But, you know, to Washington, D.C., which averaged last year a violent murder every other day, 2 weeks without a murder was a hell of a track record. And then we just surged the National Guard to Memphis, Tennessee. Again, a Democrat city in a red state, but where the mayor said, we are sick of our people being afraid to walk safely on the streets, so why don't you help us? And that's our basic attitude in the Trump administration is, look, we should not allow people to take over. We should not allow these violent criminals to take over city streets. And if the local government wants our help, if the local authorities want our help, then we are going to help them because we stand for American safety everywhere, whether it's a big city or a small one. Thank you, young man. So this is what it means. Being pro-law and order is actually not that difficult. There are some things we do, some issues we address that are so complicated and so challenging, but supporting our local law enforcement is actually pretty easy. It's just a question of political willpower. Here's thing number one, very simple. If our great police officers find a violent criminal and lock them up, we ought to keep them locked up instead of letting them back on our streets with a slap on the wrist. That means we want to give our police officers the very best equipment and the very best protection anywhere in the world. We want you guys to have the very best, and we're going to fight every single day to make sure that they have it. It means punishing state and local jurisdictions that restrict your ability to do police work. They just want to do their jobs. They ought to be allowed to do it. And it means pursuing enhanced sentences for violent criminals, like the violent criminal who murdered that poor innocent girl in Charlotte, North Carolina just a couple of months ago. And I want to talk about her for a second because I think, we got a beautiful baby over there. How you doing, ma'am? Yeah, I would like to. How old is she? 6 months old. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for bringing her. We want law and order for her above all else, right? That's why we're doing what we do. But we all know a couple weeks ago, and it's one of these things that got bumped out of the news because of the political assassination of Charlie Kirk. And so let me talk just a bit about that. You all know Charlie. He was a great guy. He was a great husband, a great father. He believed in two things, I think, above all else. Number one, the second most important, is he believed in political debate in the United States of America, that we ought to talk about our disagreements and not attack one another over our disagreements. And he gave his life dying for that principle. And the second thing he believed, and it was the most important, is that he wanted to be a Christian evangelist. He wanted to bring the gospel everywhere, and he saw connecting with people and debating politics as an opportunity to talk about his faith. And I think it's important to honor him by recognizing that this is a kid, and he died at 31 years old. This is a kid who every single day, he would go to these college campuses, he would talk for 3 hours with anybody about whatever they wanted to talk about, and he believed in the civic virtue of open debate. He gave his life to protect that civic virtue, and he gave his life serving that civic virtue at the highest level. He was a great guy, and his loss was the nation's loss. And Erica, we love you. Erica's his beautiful widow. And I think you all will join me in saying that what happened to Charlie was disgusting, it was unacceptable, and it is the most anti-American act of violence that we've seen in the last couple of weeks in this country. It was a disgrace. But thank you all. I appreciate that, and the thing is, it actually bumped out of the news this terrible story in Charlotte. And here's the basic summary, as far as I can recall it, is you have a violent criminal who has been arrested 14 times, often for very violent offenses, who gets on a bus with an innocent young girl, 22 years old, and slits her throat, and she dies. She died because she was coming home from work. She worked at a pizzeria. She came from a beautiful family. She had a young boyfriend. She had her entire life ahead of her, and she was actually a refugee from Ukraine. So she came from a war-torn country. She sought shelter in the United States of America, and because of soft-on-crime policies, she was murdered here, not in the war-torn country she came from. Isn't that a disgrace? And isn't that an insult to the incredible law enforcement officers who arrested this person 14 times? They did everything that they could to keep this thug off the streets, and it was the political leadership that failed, and we got to be honest about that. I saw former Governor Cooper say, and this is Michael Whatley's opponent, former Governor Cooper said just a couple of days after the attack that we have got to do more when it comes to law enforcement to keep people like this off the streets. And my response was, Governor, he was arrested 14 times. Law enforcement did their job. It's time for you to do your job. And it's so amazing to me, political Democrats, I don't think it's all Democrats, I actually think most Democrats want what most Republicans want, which is safety in their communities, but they always manage to turn issues of crime into a distraction about race. They always try to say that law enforcement, locking violent criminals up, is inherently racist, and I gotta be honest with you, that's an insult to white people, it's an insult to black people too, because all of us just wanna live safely in our communities. It doesn't make an ounce of sense to me. But I actually, because of these Democrat talking points, I went and looked up. Do you know that in most big cities, the gross majority, over 90% of violent crime is committed by fewer than 1% of the city's residents? This is not a black-white issue. This is, we've got a small percentage of violent criminals in our communities. Democrats want to let them out of prison, and Republicans want to put them in prison and keep them there so that all of us are safe in the process. I think that's common sense, don't you? So I also got to talk a little bit about another law and order problem. I said Charlie Kirk's assassination was the most political and disgusting violence that we've had in this country in the last couple of weeks. And that was true maybe until this morning, because I don't know if you all have followed the news, and we're still learning a little bit about it. But what we know is that in Dallas, Texas, an ICE facility, an Immigrations and Customs Enforcement facility, was opened fire upon by a violent left-wing extremist, a person who wrote anti-ICE messaging on their bullets, and there's some evidence that we have that's not yet public, but we know this person was politically motivated. They were politically motivated to go after law enforcement. They were politically motivated to go after people who are enforcing our border. I think that is the most disgusting thing. The very people who keep us safe, honored, and protected, and praised by Democrats and alike. It is time to stop the rhetorical assault on law enforcement. Because here's what happens. Because here's what happens when Democrats like Gavin Newsom did say that these people are part of an authoritarian government. When the left-wing media lies about what they're doing, when they lie about who they're arresting, when they lie about the actual job of law enforcement, what they're doing is encouraging crazy people to go and commit violence.